Wowzers.
Hi,
Over
Jimmy.
to us. Hey, Matty, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you.
Yeah.
As we were talking a little while ago, things we can't actually decide if we saw each other during the process or not.
I don't think we did. No, I don't think we did because I don't really know because I don't think we can attribute that to
COVID, yeah.
the pandemic thing, which feels like a distant memory.
It was a distant memory.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming down today. I know you only do it so that you can see me, but you know that's fine. Be really good to understand. Kind of, tell me about you. Tell me about your journey. Where did you start? How did you end up with the business you ended up, and kind of what was that like?
You won the full shooting match.
You're going to have to be quick. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
You got to give us a short shooting match, not the long one.
My career is quite varied. I've been very lucky. I've had fun wherever I've gone, which I think says more about them than it does about me. But so I harboured a desire to work in broadcasting, which I did for a short spell. I used to work at the BBC in Manchester, working on various TV programmes of the 90s that had varying levels of success.
Did you work at Pebble Mill, is that what you're saying?
No, I played a five-a-side football at Pebble Mill, which was good fun. And I refereed the five-a-side final. And I was a bit like a wacky ref. I worked at the BBC and I wanted to either direct, write, act, or a combination of all those three. So that was what my kind of vocational studies were. And then I found myself, as one does with a career, being in the right environment, but not necessarily getting propelled into the right spaces. So I ended up becoming a graphic designer, which was, for a man who can't illustrate, was quite an interesting career choice. It was on the cusp of the digital revolution. So this is pre-internet, pre-email. Everything was picked up on a hard drive and taken to the printers and such. So I was really fortunate, worked on a lot of productions, varying roles from runner. I mean, my first job was a postman in that environment where they kept the graduate post, and then runner, and then up to working in the graphics department, working on various TV titles and such. And then after that, I then helped him.
Was one of them the Crystal Maze?
No, I wasn't, unfortunately. You'd never see us in the same room, though. And he invented. You remember Bongo, the Drink It in the Congo? He scripted that.
Really?
Yeah. And he invented something like the What's It, Richard.
Give over.
I am telling you, he is a deep well, that man. Yeah. But you made me digress then, James. So then after that, I made pop videos for a famous Manchester band for a spell, which was great, and a big documentary. And that was as wild and as raucous as you would imagine. And then I started thinking, well, I'm maybe getting a little bit old now in my mid-20s, and I might need to do something a little bit more considered and corporate. And so then I started working for a small business that had basically made its money doing IT support, but they recognised that what was then called multimedia was kind of around the corner. So they put together a team of 4 of us. And with my now new graphic design and development skills, I was kind of a shoe-in, and I worked with some coders and some 3D guys, and we did some quite interesting stuff. Again, really early days of the internet, domains were like 500 quid and stuff like that. And then, so we'd made a lot of CD-ROMs at the time for big corporate clients, and did stuff like that. And then it wasn't really their vocation, that company, to do that. So I found myself being made redundant alongside the rest of my colleagues, one of whom I maintained a relationship with, and we ultimately became business partners of 20 plus years, and that would be Abe, who you know. And then after, we were unceremoniously ejected from that business in Manchester. We then set up a micro business doing design, development, hosting, content management systems, early SEO, and then early e-commerce websites. And I always harbored a desire to build a nice business, which is what we did, but it could only ever be described as a lifestyle business. But then I personally wanted to do something that we could utilize our own skills, turn it inward, and then see what we could do. In a nutshell, we'd seen that we had good amount of skills, talents, and successful clients, and we thought, let's just see what we can do. So we had a couple of kind of trials and failed ventures in different areas, which were no great shakes. It wasn't like, we didn't remortgage our house. We had skills and we could raise digital presence from the ground up in a relatively low cost but time intensive manner. And then around 2008, we got involved with another business that had just started with a brand new concept that was called then an electronic cigarette. And then that, as they say, was the start of the first time I saw and used an electronic cigarette. I instantly knew that was just a game changer. There were so many unknowns then, but I think the knowns were inherently this has got to be safer than, combustible tobacco, which demonstrably it's proven to be the case as years have gone on and people have done more and more research into that. We were one of the first UK manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, retail estate owners, and there was a handful of us before the real swathe of every high street being taken over by a vape store came to pass. And so we were one of those really fortuitous stories that went from kitchen table to, I think we peaked at 120 employees and 20 odd stores in the estate. And
so that business grew and was very successful, was really successful. Whichever way you skin it, was a very successful business. And part of that success was the market growing, and part of that success was you getting things right and really promoting that business. What took you from this really growing, successful business to actually let's think about selling? Because I don't want to flatter you too much, but you're still quite young.
I just look young, Jimmy. I think, it's really
Says my piece of paper.
I think, it's a really interesting question. And I think like most people, I don't class myself as an entrepreneur because I can't spell it. So I think that figures against you, doesn't it? So I always get the E and the U the wrong way around. But I think, in all seriousness, though,
there's no U in entrepreneur.
Yeah, there you go. There's no I in it either. No, but in all seriousness, I think, you don't set out. It's really interesting. I'm mentoring a young lad now, and I said to him, "What do you want to be?" He said, "I want to be an entrepreneur." And I was like, "Well, what does that actually mean?" And when we dissect it, it's akin to where, in the 90s where talent shows became popular again and people say, I just want to be famous. Like, what discernible talent have you got? What are you going to be an entrepreneur in? So, but we were savvy. We and like I said, my trajectory was quite varied. So I was able to, almost like a magpie, just take elements of it, be it broadcasting. And I think, narrative's got a beginning, middle, and an end. Well, I can apply that to a product because it needs to have an audience. It needs to have meaning within its brand. So there was lots of things that I could steal from my previous careers that I could apply into what if effectively was an FMCG kind of environment.
You said you beginning, middle, and end. Is that how you saw the business? That
no,
it
not
would
necessarily.
Have a middle and it would have an end.
Not potentially, but I couldn't say that it wasn't our vaulting ambition. It wasn't like the MO why we set up the business, but it became apparent when we started experiencing growth. And I think most people would admit, luck is a big feature. Talent, whatever the heady mix is. I'm sure people have, got, exactly. Timing, we're all there. But I like to think that we were pretty zeitgeist, even insofar as when people would say, what are you doing now? And I'd explain to them, and not many people had heard of what was certainly not vaping. I don't think vaping was even coined as a term back then. So we were right on the cusp of something new and exciting, but it was never, as kind of choreographed as saying, we will start this business and then we will sell this business. It was just, but I think to your point, I think the environment that we operated in and that sector particularly is quite unique insofar as certainly fast forward, almost 15, 16 years, whatever it is, we have interests in political, legislative, moral, from the moral panic in and around, youth uptake and vaping use. And commercial, and so all those, and legal, so all those kind of things, which are, not solely applicable to that industry, but were certainly really pertinent. And so there was a fervour that came not just with what the product was, how successful it was as a brand, but what its impact was in society. And I think, and still now, I feel quite passionate about vaping's role in society when it comes to giving people an informed choice as to what the difference is between a combustible tobacco and nicotine addiction, and a non-combustible tobacco and nicotine addiction. And that subsequently led us to do a lot of work with smoking cessation, public health bodies, all that ecosystem within the NHS of, basically trying to offset circa 70,000 unnecessary tobacco-related deaths a year in the UK alone. So I am really passionate about that, because everybody's lives have been touched by somebody who's had cancer or smoking, related disease within the family. So, and I'm not alone in that.
So that passion comes through, and the passion for the business was always there, and that passion to do good always came through. But what was that epiphany what was that? How did that conversation come about that said, okay, we probably should exit the business? What was the genesis of that conversation?
Well, again, I think, I liken, which sounds like, quite hyperbolic, but I liken the rise of vaping globally, and certainly within the UK, which, I'm experienced in, to that of what Napster did to the music industry, insofar as we had established institutions. Imagine somebody saying, I'm going to start a new tobacco brand. It's almost unheard of. I don't even know if legally one could do that. And then all of a sudden, people who could start a business from their kitchen table could become a real commercial threat to sales, which is really interesting. But we know how profitable and how big, multinational tobacco companies are. But I think what we were able to demonstrate was an agility and be able to pivot very, very quickly with regards to what the market wanted. Again, timing was unique. Forums were really popular at that time, and we had instant access. It's more commonplace now, but we had instant access to what our customers thought about what they wanted from a technological perspective. The manufacturers, predominantly in China for every company, were moving at a pace where, new models and faster tech, better technology was evolving all the time. So, and we were almost literally the middleman in speaking to manufacturers, swaying what we wanted, and equally getting stuff from them and feeding it back into our customers. And so it was this kind of symbiotic triangle of communication that worked for us. But what was the question?
What changed? What led you to go from?
So, looking at the environment within which we were operating, we were in and amongst huge behemoths. It's a controversial, as of yet unknown effect in terms of what this product may or may not do in positive and negative to the body. We had literally always lived under the sword of Damocles that could have come down. The industry nearly finished in, I think, 2012, 2013. There was some legislation that would have just outright banned it. But in a society where tobacco is still freely available to sale, I think that ultimately is what shifted the balance to say you can't, stop a product that is aligned with tobacco, albeit at many magnitudes different. So there was always a sense that, I wasn't arrogant or naive or bullish enough to think that we would become a super huge multinational corporation and then recognizing, which has proven to be the case, where the industry may end up in terms of points of singularity with brand, points of singularity with tech, legislation that comes in and out. A previous prime minister had a smoking bill that affected vaping that ultimately never saw through. But and some of those are really interesting and should be addressed. But I think
was your decision therefore very strategic?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to think that I knew that there was a shelf life to us as a brand and a business, and equally that there were probably better people out there who could take it to a different level. It was, it was something. We had lots of discussion up until the point, you and I knew each other for a good couple of years before we engaged you professionally. But I think one thing that speaking to you and your teams over the years was that getting the business into a state of preparedness for sale could only be benefit. And I still say this to people now who are going through the same process, that it's win-win because your business was likely to improve, and you're good to go. It's like a grab bag off a sinking ship. You grab your bag and you jump. So, but yeah, and then as time evolves and our industry was quite frothy, really interesting to see the acquisitions that were made, particularly by Big Tobacco, and subsequently what happened to those brands, that I think then that stopped, because I think those tobacco organisations recognised that actually buying and building existing brands wasn't perhaps how they would recapture some of the market that they may have lost.
Well, just you mentioned that you spent some time preparing the business for sale, and that was important. It both improved the business and improved the eventual outcome you got to with the business when you sold it. It's one of these. It's a common thing I think most business owners look at and are looking for guidance on. Do you think going to an advisor or going to someone that, like me, who had a relationship in your business, do you think it was important to get someone who really understood the business to give you that advice, or do you think that can be quite generic? Kind of how does that?
Yeah, I think it's critical for somebody to understand the business. I think, you and I have got to know each other very well, and I do class you as a friend, and I will ring you up about different ideas or trajectories that we share experiences, albeit that we've got different backgrounds. But I think
it's only because my phone doesn't seem to screen your calls properly.
We didn't answer today. But I think that in all seriousness, though, I think it's critical for somebody to understand your business, because there are elements of those negotiations that I know you were keen for me not to be involved in, for whatever reason, strategically from your perspective. Either you need a buffer or you need time to either genuinely consult with us or genuinely just use it as a make weight to buy yourself, thinking room and space. But I think if you don't, in your position, I'm surmising, but if you don't understand the business, you don't understand the trajectory of what may or may not happen, you couldn't possibly extol those virtues to a potential buyer. And I think that you demonstrated, you and Mark, you demonstrated an understanding. And it took a long while, but I appreciated the nature of how inquisitive you are with purpose. I think that, you are genuinely interested and interesting in what we do. And I think that helps you, you need to be in a state of preparedness as much as we did, really, from that perspective,
No, that's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. You can only help someone achieve the best, the outcome they want to achieve, if you really understand what they're trying to achieve and what the business does and all that kind of stuff.
But equally, this is meant to be about me, not you, isn't it?
Thanks.
You're just fishing for compliments. You're just going to be like...
I hope so. We've got another 25 minutes of this. When you had these conversations with the other shareholders, how much of the focus was on timing and how much was on value, and how much was there always it has to be X for it to work?
I think there was always a figure that I can't remember what it is now, though, equally, but I think there was always a figure at which conversations would get a bit more serious. And we were fortunate, really. We didn't, as it transpired, we didn't really have that many suitors, and I think it's fair to say that the market was in. To my knowledge, I don't think there's been another acquisition since ours, which has gone beyond 2 years. Now, I may be wrong, but it doesn't feel that that market is particularly frothy. And I think everybody is just looking at what is, this vape sector and wondering how is it going to evolve? What will a potential dark market, which is what's been mooted, affect it? Will established brands still maintain that halo effect because they've been established, because, our brand was 15 years old when we sold it, 14 years old, whatever. So, and it had legacy. I mean, we weren't the biggest by any stretch of anybody's imagination, but we were well respected and we had good reputation for sound manufacturing, etc. But I think it's important that, I can't remember the question, Jim.
We'll move on. Yeah. I think it'd be really useful. One of the things that people often don't think about is our experience with clients is they get very focused on what's happening to the transaction. Can they transact? Can they get the value they need? Can they get the structure they need? What's going to happen to their staff and the business and all that kind of stuff. But don't always think about what's going to happen afterwards. Did you give any time to that? Did you give any time to what do I do afterwards? And what did your thought process go down on that before the sale?
Yeah, I think we had what can only be described as a kind of a serious level of interest, and then ultimately became a near miss, which was fine. It was amicable, but it didn't come to anything. And I think there was one afternoon after work where I was sat in my garden and I was just thinking, I'm on the cusp of dramatically changing what my everyday life would be. And I wouldn't say I was reticent to sell the business, but the most enjoyment I got out of the business was building the business, working with colleagues, evolving the business. And it comes with stresses and strains and everything, but ultimately being able to develop as an individual, develop people, and I'm not taking any claim for other people's successes, but we certainly, I like to think we created an environment within which people could nurture their own skills, and that was really important to me. And we had a fiercely loyal workforce, and they were loyal right up to the end. And there were a lot of considerations, and their well-being was ultimately a big factor in making sure that I was making the right decision, and equally toying with the idea of what's best for me and my family and what's best for them, and making sure. So it's a difficult. I probably took too much on in terms of trying to please everybody, and a lot of it is unknown, because ultimately once you hand the keys over and you ride off into the sunset, then it's somebody else's decision, and that's largely taken out of your hand.
So, talking about kind of riding off into the sunset, how has post sale been compared to what you thought it would be if you'd thought about it?
It's been similar to where my fears were aligned, insofar as people were very generous with me within the business and after the business, both in terms of being very complimentary about who I am, congratulating me on nothing to do with other than just creating something that generated different things. And then a colleague of mine from within the sector who'd been through the same process for me and said, you will experience X, Y, and Z. And if I'm honest, I have experienced X, Y, and Z, and that, to varying degrees and not limited to, that might be a sense of direction, purpose, what's the next. I remember 12 months still within the business, still running the business, post the initial signing over of the business. We had 12 months of an exit earn-out period. And after that, I was really full of fervour and going at 100 miles an hour and wanting to latch on to the next thing, just because I didn't want to stop, really. Yeah. But I must admit, I'm 2 years after the process now, and I think it is a big consideration. And it sounds like hashtag first world problems, but it is weird, though. It is weird to have something and then not have it. And I don't feel precious about it. I don't want it back, or I don't lament over a loss of it. But is
it a loss of having a focus?
I think that's right. Yeah. And I still feel relevant and pertinent, but not to the extent. And then to your point, all joking aside, I do think I've got one more rodeo in me of something that's quite, of interest to me. Yeah. And I am 51 now, and I do experience those existential late 90s.
How old was what's the space when you started McDonald's? 54.
Exactly.
And you've got time to start a well-being business.
Yeah, exactly.
You were talking just now about that loss of focus and how that's changed.
Change in focus.
Change in focus. Yeah. So you haven't got that central business now,
Absolutely,
and you're changing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying how life is now?
Yeah, I think I am enjoying life. I think what the period immediately after my complete exit from the business gave me was lots of opportunity, lots of time to reflect, and not obviously, but subsequently people present themselves to you in different ways with regard to it, maybe projects that they're getting going, startups or whatever. So that's really interesting. And then what would appeal to me in terms of what I'd want to do next? I think one thing it has done, and this has pretty much always been my mantra, time is more important to me than money in terms of my outlook on life. And I have time now. And if I'm going to put some of that time that I have to something other, then it's got to really light a fire in my belly. And having the privilege of being able to assess what's going to light the fire in my belly is a real plus. And I like to think, based on previous experiences, either within different industries or this industry or wherever it may well be, that my judgment is sound enough to think, that's, commercially ticks a box, intellectually is of interest, from a kind of all good conscience and faith perspective as well, that I'm not getting involved in anything that, would either bore me or wouldn't be bringing a better society, which sounds very grandiose, but it's true, really.
No, and you have to have purpose, don't you?
Yeah, and you picked up on it. I am really evangelical about the role that vaping can play in society, and I think that we need to push that agenda. And we have now people who were children when I started my business who use that product, but we haven't really had the discourse other than sensational tabloid headlines that misinform people. And I'm not suggesting that people should take it up. I just want people to be informed. And I think that, there's a great disservice that, and I don't like falling into tropes about, social media or mainstream media, but there's a lot of misinformation that's always been around societies. It doesn't matter what platform it's on. And I'm really interested in making sure that people understand, whatever element, whatever sector it is, what the implications and consequences are. And as long as they're well informed, then they can make their own decision accordingly, and anything in and around that space is of interest to me, I think.
You mentioned having time. One of the things I think most business owners recognise is that they can either have time or money. You very rarely manage to get both. Does that feel like that's changed for you? Do you see that as a change where you do have more time and perhaps spend it with the family? I know you've got kids, or where you can spend, you have more potential, more financial freedom, where it's not related to you having to work very hard to achieve it. Is that something that resonates? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I've alluded to it. My story, literally was, one that started from humble beginnings, and then so I think getting acclimatized to having a standard of a way of life that was different to what I started out having is something that I'm cognizant of and privileged and thankful for. I think going back to your point, I think the biggest thing for me was I was probably trying too hard to get onto the next big thing, as opposed to just saying, well, hang on a minute, just take a beat. I think that's a really sound bit of advice that people have given me, and I would, if people ever sought my counsel post a big move. Say it again, Matthew.
Just take a beat and think about where you're going to be next, what you want to do next. Because, looking back at my career, it was so fraught with building this. And we, as I say, there were so many facets to the business, from initially employing people to manufacturing to distribution to negotiating new contracts with big fascias to setting up our own retail estate, that you would continuously preoccupied with just getting, technology, developing products, all those sorts of things. Which is fun. That, we make stuff. That's what we do as humans, isn't it? We want the only legacy you can leave is stuff that you either get remembered for or people are thankful for. Our great grandkids won't know us. They won't remember us. They might see digital footprints that we've never had in the past. But I think living in that moment is really interesting, and it's quite nice to live in the moment when you're running a business. But then after that, when you go again. Because I didn't know I'd end up in this sector, but I knew I wanted to do something. And now my ambition is still there, but it's different. I'm not hungry, literally hungry like I was when I started, and all those things do. Yeah. And you have to be aware of that, I think, without being too self-deprecating either. You know that
No.
you want to move on and do something.
I guess you also need to your thought about having a choice is now you have that time and space to make a proactive choice. Whereas when you're in business, you can be proactive about strategy, but quite often you're just being reactive.
Absolutely,
just fixing problems.
Absolutely, yeah. And I did dive back into some of my old passions that I'd not spent any time doing. I started writing again, and it probably never see the light of day, but it was just nice to, express my thoughts in a way that was cohesive and to no real purpose. Maybe there was a purpose. Maybe it was drawing on experiences or whatever. So that was quite nice. And then at different times I'd go, oh yeah, I can afford to do that from a time perspective, or that no one needs my time like everybody needed my time before. So that's quite nice. But I think in your game, and you were good, Jimmy. I'll tell you that to your face, and committed to celluloid. But you are good, and your team is good, and everybody's reactions to this will be different, and each one of your different projects will be different. But I think I'll go back to it again, making sure that there's a beginning and a middle and an end to that process. So you prepped us very well at the beginning, and then we became less involved because that's your time to hold the reins and, steer this ship onto shores. And then afterwards, you're always there for me, which I think is really important, and I know you, in your lifetime, you've had similar experiences that you can draw on. But I do think it's interesting. And I was really thankful for that one individual who I shan't name, who was really generous with his time and his opinions because he'd been through it. Yeah. And now 2 years on, he phoned me on literally the day that it went public, because we couldn't go public with ours until it was, officially announced to the markets. And he was really generous, and I'll never forget him, and I do thank him for that. And he was right. What he foreshadowed came to fruition for me in many ways. And yeah, I'd like to think that if anybody phoned me up with a similar dilemma, I'd be able to at least be open and honest with regard to what it does mean. But it is tricky. It is tricky to just stop. Yeah. And then, for me as an individual, it might be different for other people.
What's the? I mean, you've talked eloquently about many of the trials and tribulations, upsides and downsides. If you could give one piece of advice to someone thinking of starting the business, what is the one thing that no one tells you, or what's the thing that you should do? Kind of, is there a piece of advice or something that people might not realise that is worth imparting to them?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I wouldn't like to narrow it down to one piece of advice, really. I would say be comfortable with whom you're going to have representing you and make sure that you can trust them and you like them, because you end up spending a lot of time with each other.
But that presumes that you should always have an advisor.
You and I had a conversation. I was, jokingly, I don't think I was joking at the time, to be fair. I was just going to do it for varying reasons, but I was always transparent with you. And I knew that you pleading with me to not do it without somebody knowing what they were doing was critical. And I know now what you were alluding to. And I think it's really interesting when, and I never harbored any negativity towards you or your team or the various legal people that we brought in, like Bex, for example. But you've got to be patient. You've got to understand that there will be different times where you're really earning your money and where it seems that you're not, but you are, because it's all part. And then all of a sudden it starts to really accelerate when it gets to, kind of the final throws. Yeah. And we all commented on that insofar as, when we, I mean, you're more experienced than me, but I don't think our acquisition was particularly acrimonious, not fraught with too many bumps in the roads. It was, I would imagine it was pretty relatively straightforward, but there were times where people had to, and I'm qualifying the next turn of phrase that I use, where people had to show their teeth a little bit and, that we're not going down that route. Yeah. That's not going to happen, or whatever it was. And that was quite nice to sit back and think, well, yeah, I've maybe had a discussion with you and to a point instructed you what my intention or what my desire would be, and then seeing you or your colleagues take that mantle on and you know, put forth whatever, you know, different circumstance it was always, yeah, that was good. You know, felt that, you know, and yeah, you should never do this without representation, I don't think.
That's probably the hardest thing for us to actually convince people that that's the case, because it's, you don't know what you don't know in this process, and therefore 100%. When you get halfway down it, it's so you've done it, you look back and say, so I think it's what you're saying, is looking back, it was.
Yeah, and also, and in no way would I suggest the people who acquired us were, but there are unscrupulous people out there who would take advantage of people who think that they could navigate these choppy waters by themselves. Yeah, I mean, it's like asking your plumber to bake you a cake. You know, you don't do that. Unless he's a good baker, or she is. Yeah, no, I think it's critical that you go through that process with people who know what they're doing. Yeah.
So you look back with positive thoughts?
Of the process with you, or?
Generally, the selling your business and the aftermath?
Yeah, I don't think I could look back with anything other than positivity. You know, there were different times where it didn't feel positive. You know, there were a couple of occasions where the transaction looked like, from my perspective, and you always talk me down, you know, without detailing them, there were a couple of incidents that I thought, oh, that's not going to go down well. That could be a game changer. And you were saying, don't worry, this is all part of the course. And, you know, yeah. But it's interesting doing it once and how I would go into doing it next time, either acquiring or, you know, being acquired. But that's just my experience now. You know, I would definitely. Well, I've done it once. It wouldn't be my first rodeo anymore. So, you know, and I wouldn't say that. But even doing it once wouldn't give me the confidence to think I'm going to do it on my own. Certainly not. No, certainly not. Everybody needs a Jimmy.
Matthew, thank you. I really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and you.
All right. Peace out.